So welcome to Live Action Slush, the early bird edition. My name's Jennifer Landels. I'm the I'm the managing editor at Pulp Literature Press. And I also write under J.M. Landels, that's what my name tag says. So I'm just here to read, though, I may add my 2 bits as well if we get to that point. And I'll just let the rest of the panel introduce themselves.
I'm Robert Runte. I'm senior editor at Five Rivers Publishing, and I'm also senior editor with Essential Edits, which is editor cooperative, where we take in manuscripts and hand them out to whoever's that area, like literary versus mystery versus whatever. Right? So.
I'm Rhonda Parrish. I'm an assistant editor with World River Press, and I edit a lot of anthologies with several different publishers, including Tyke and Edge. And that's actually probably all you need to know.
I'm Joan Crate, and I'm a poet and literary writer, and my last book of poetry came out in 2009, Suburban Legends with Freehand, and my novel Black Apple came out with Simon & Schuster in 2016, and it just won the W.L. Mitchell Award.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
I'm Michelle Hoyman. I'm the acquisitions editor for Edge Science Fiction and Fantasy. I'm also working on a master's degree in history, so if you're submitting historical fiction, I can speak to that too. It's an interest of mine outside of science fiction and fantasy. So.
All right. So for those of you who haven't been to one of these before, the way it works is I've got first pages here of manuscripts. I'm just going to start reading, and our editors here are going to put up their hands when they would stop reading. If this came in through the slush pile and they'll put up their hands once they get to a point where it's like, no, I'm not going any farther. Bear in mind, this is a little more brutal than what happens in a slush pile. Because we keep things moving. Even if you were to get, a few red flags, you might still skip to the middle of the story, or you might skip to the end or something like that. But it gives you an idea of what we as editors are looking for and not looking for when we get a manuscript across our desk. Are we doing it with 2 hands up? Is stopping at 2 hands up, or 3 hands up, or all 4? What are we?
I think 2 or 3. If you go all 4, we'll get through on all of them.
Yeah. So 3 or 3 hands?
Maybe 3.
Okay, 3 strikes, and we'll stop. Davy knew something was in the lake. He'd accidentally snagged it a couple of times, and the feel of the line told him it wasn't any rock or seaweed. They felt different. Seaweed was too stringy, and rocks too stiff. Whatever was under that murky water was pliable, and he was going to get it. He'd already lost 2 cheap hooks, bent from the weight of whatever was down there. This time he put on a steel hook. Nothing breaks those. He threw another cast into the area right beside the reeds. He was always surprised at the depth of the lake here. Most lakes around this part of Manitoba were like basins, but Blackthorn Lake was the exception. A chill swept through his body as Davy realized he hooked his treasure. The boat rocking, he sat down and began to slowly reel in the heavy mass. It happened in an instant. The rod sailed skyward, and he felt the hook as it tore into his collarbone. Cursing, he grabbed the filleting knife from the nearby tackle box. Tearing it out of the sheath, he cut the line off the end of the hook. Dad was going to kill him. Moving toward the motor, Davy reached for the starter cord, his hands now covered in blood. Pulling the cord, his grip failed, and he stumbled against the hull. Wiping hands on his shorts, he pulled again, and the motor started, and Davy maneuvered out of his secret fishing hole. Looking back, he froze as the human skull bobbed to the surface of the lake.
Nice.
We got to the end. Good start.
Yeah, wow. I might turn it down because I don't do horror, but I'd certainly go further to see if that's what it was, or if it was going to morph into something else, but that got my attention.
I really liked it. I would have just made one note so far on the first page, and that is he was always surprised by the depth of the lake is bogus. He wasn't actually always surprised. That's just the author's way of telling the reader about the lake. So if you can find a more elegant way to do that. But that's a tiny note, and I would have totally kept reading.
Yeah.
I really liked the first line too. I thought the first line was really good. What was the? do you
Davy
remember?
knew something was in the lake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a literary writer, but still, with the skull and everything, this book could go almost anywhere. I thought it was pretty good. The one word, and this is minor, I didn't like was treasure, because that immediately, the word he caught as treasure, it immediately brings an image, of treasure. So I would change that. But other than that, no, I think it's working pretty well.
I've been watching a lot of Bones lately, and it felt like the opening sequence where the poor unfortunate people find the body. So I really enjoyed that. Something that did catch my ear was the use of seaweed, because if he's in a lake, like that's super nitpicky, and I wouldn't have stopped reading, but something to think about, like lakeweed or waterweed or something rather than seaweed.
You guys are good.
All right, so this is anonymous, but when we get to the end and nobody puts their hands up, if you wanna fess up and say it's yours, feel free. So, does anyone? All right, the bar is set high.
No pressure.
Alex frantically shoved at the pound key on the kitchen phone. He needed to hear the message again. There was a moment of tense breathing, then a girl's voice. Hi, it's Myra Tran calling. I know this is weird, me calling you out of the blue like this, but I don't really know anyone in Seattle anymore, and I need help. Someone kidnapped my dad. These men with guns showed up. He made me hide under the bed, and then they were gone. Look, I know this sounds like a bad joke, but it's not, and I really need your help, Alex. Please call me back. Alex jotted down the number on the pad his mom always left by the phone. The call had come in about 20 minutes ago, so he figured Myra could wait another 5 minutes while he figured out what to do. The last person he'd been expecting to hear from, ever, was Myra. He hadn't heard a thing from her since she moved to Vancouver with her mom. He didn't owe her anything. He grabbed a juice box from the fridge, stabbed the tiny straw into the hole, and drank until the sides on the container started to collapse. Okay.
My issues started at the beginning, just being very nitpicky again. He shoved the pound key. That feels a wrong verb for me. You punch it, you hit it, you whatever, but you don't shove it. And I really liked that the phone message was disjointed. It gave that sense of panic from the person who was leaving it. But there's a sense of panic because she's leaving it and he's just going to wait 5 minutes while he figures out what to, no. I felt like the author buying time to tell the reader more things about the story before actually just getting to the story. So I actually probably would have kept reading, but that was like my 3 little things.
For me, well, it was just that, and it's not literary, so don't put it in as a literary story, but it seems like the first page, I know what's going to happen with this. It tells me too much, like right from the beginning. I feel like I know what's going to unfold here, and it's not the type of story I'd be interested in. That doesn't mean it wouldn't work for, a particular kind of formulaic genre. Might be perfect for it.
Yeah, it felt like there was an interesting idea and there was some momentum building, and then it stops and he has a juice box. I want to know why she phoned him instead of the police.
Yeah.
What's the mystery there? But the other thing that caught my ear was he mentioned his mom's notepad, which sort of makes it sound like maybe it's YA, and Edge doesn't really do a lot of YA, so if that was a submission I got, I would probably stop reading it that way.
It is marked as YA.
I might have kept going because I saw some of those things, especially the stop. But I get that in almost all the manuscripts that come across my desk, so I might have kept going to see if there are other problems. But in the whole, it was came across as very adequate to me. But I'd have to go forward to see whether there was something I could work with.
Yeah, I wouldn't have stopped reading. I just would have started making notes and okay, we need to cut this and we need to. Mm-hmm. But I would have kept going a bit further. But for the sake of this panel, I usually, as soon as I would have started skimming, that's usually when I put my hand up.
Yeah, and likewise, I would have jumped a few pages in just to see, when I get to that part that you guys have all reached, I kind of let's see what's further in, just in case something's hidden. That's Right. Okay. When my mother told Barry to stop by the cottage that evening, I knew 2 things: I would soon be pregnant, and my grandmother would soon be dead. She hadn't meant for me to overhear. I was meant to be at the workshop studying. But we were short of bodies, and poring over old diagrams I'd memorized and integrated into my internal operating system when I was a child just seemed like a waste of time on a day so fine. The wind was blowing gentle ripples across the lake, and the sun was shining in a cloudless sky. In contrast, the workshop was close and stank of copper, and the slough it stood beside was stained white with saline and reeking. I decided to visit Ira on the hill, stretch my legs on the road to Upper Whitholm. He'd expressed an interest in what I'd told him of my latest essay, which was scratched out on an old vellum rolled up in my room. The poplar leaves clapped in the breeze, applauding my decision as I locked the workshop door. The iron left black on my fingers as I struggled to turn the key in the heavy old lock, and I rubbed my fingers absently against my thigh as I turned away, staining the thick wool of my faded blue dress. All my dresses were blue, though the color did not suit me, as that was the color we Latha were permitted to wear. I bore earth tones on my wrists, though, strips of wool and ribbons tied tight from my hands to halfway up my forearms. Even a red ribbon I had from a peddler for treating a cut on his foot without telling my mother. He was afraid of her and begged for my aid without troubling her. I had taken the token and remembered my small and stupid rebellion every time I looked at its brightness. Stupid because to take payment... What?
I was the only one who had problems with this, apparently. I found myself falling out of the point of view because too much of what was being described were things that would have been normal every day to that person. So them explaining so much to the reader annoyed me that I thought, well, I wouldn't actually think, I can think of examples, but integrated into my internal operating system, right? Like if you actually have an internal operating system, it's just you. You don't think of, you know what I mean? Like when you go to toast, you don't say, I'm going to toast this piece of toast by having hot wires illuminate inside the toast. You just do it. So there was too much of that, and I let the first few go, but as it accumulated, it started to annoy me.
But as an example of what doesn't work for one editor works for another, I liked that they referred to it as an internal operating system because that's not a typical way that you would refer it. So then it's intriguing, and I want to know, like, are they robotic or android, or is there something to that choice? I liked the very beginning that I knew I was soon going to be pregnant and my grandmother would be dead. Because then you're wondering if it's like the three women. Anyway, but it went from that really nice hook to talking about the latest essay, which felt like this is the main story and we're going to go here a little bit and then we'll come back to the main story. But I would have kept reading because there was a lot of nice descriptions. You kind of want to be careful about falling into familiar things with the color-coded clothing and that sort of stuff though as well.
I was intrigued. Now, of course, when you pick up a book, you know what genre it is, basically. So I was thinking literary, but so when I also was really intrigued with the pregnancy and my grandmother would be dead, and I wanted to hear more about that. When I got to the internal operating system, I didn't like that, but I assumed that she was thinking of herself in some sort of mechanical way. Like I wasn't going, oh, this is sci-fi and maybe she's robotic or something like that. But I didn't like it anyway. I thought it was very clunky. I liked a lot of the other complexities. I liked the blue until it started explaining about why everything was color-coded. Too early for that, I thought. But, I mean, just the blue would have been fine if it just talked about the blue. The poplars, nice poetic little piece, too much at the beginning. I mean, I did enjoy the complexity, but you can't get too bogged down in details when you're bringing in a lot of different things. But overall, I was intrigued by it. I thought the writing was good, too.
I don't think I have anything to add to what's been said.
I have a couple things to add, because I'm reading it on the page, I see them. So there's one sentence that repeats the phrase "my fingers" twice, and it ends up like one above the other on the page. And watch for those things, right? You want to watch for repeated words, repeated phrases. And I started to lose interest as we got into colors and things like that as well. But that was a overall pretty fairly positive. Does anyone want to fess up to that one? Seldom all they seem. It started, as these things often did, with a curse. "How is he?" Philip Rhine asked, his voice rough and thin with exhaustion. He stood at his father's bedside, hands respectfully folded before him. Moonlight spilled through the window and mixed with the light from the torches and chandeliers. Though King Theodore had collapsed 2 weeks ago, he still hadn't woken up. Beneath his coarse gray beard, his skin was pale and sickly, but there were no marks on his body to explain his condition. The royal healer sighed through her nose as she stepped back from the king, having finished checking him over. Philip hoped there was good news, something she found that he couldn't see. He hated seeing his father like this, so still and white. It was too much like the day his mother died. The healer shook her head. "The magic is very strong and very dark," she said, pressing her hand to her forehead. "It's threaded through his veins, and I cannot shift it." Philip's heart sank lower in his chest. "I will keep trying, my prince, though I'm worried it won't do any good," she told him. "Maybe if we knew what spell was used on him, I might have a better chance at reversing it." Philip frowned. Even after days of investigation, there were still no answers. "It could have been anything," he grumbled. "Anyone." "I know, my prince," the healer sighed again. All right, that's 3. Let's just start at that end.
What caught my attention was there were quite a number of cliches. The moonlight spilled, his heart sank lower. So it sounds like there's a germ of an interesting idea, but there's a lot of kind of cliched, maybe overused fantasy phrases that are being employed here, and you could probably find a way to make them a little bit newer, put a different twist on them.
I have to agree with the cliches. Yeah, I thought so too. The moonlight, the torches. Now the monarchy thing is, I know that's kind of an emblem of fantasy, but does nobody ever get tired of monarchies? And also, they're monarchies. They're not like they're totally unjust systems, and yet often you just have a usurper who's bad and the rightful king who's good, and maybe it's not doing that, and if it's not, that's wonderful, but if it is, yawn.
I thought I thought the first line was very good, but then there was a bit of overused stuff. I would be willing to keep reading and cross most of those out as we got to an editing stage. But if the healer is sighing and the prince is like, he hopes that she has good news, I'm like, oh, probably not. That doesn't seem like a good sign. And then when she put her hand to her forehead, I was like, oh, you're losing me. And then about the third time she said, my prince, I was done, because it's a peeve of mine when people refer to other people as their titles over and over. So that's a personal me thing.
I got a lot of this across my desk, so yeah, it seemed average what I deal with, so I didn't maybe react as strongly, but I agree with everything that was said.
And yeah, it wasn't gripping me. I mean, I would have kept reading, but it wasn't something that's like, oh yeah, I'm really into this. I'd need something more with more of a hook. One thing to note when you're submitting these things, try to use a 12-point font and serif font. Sans serif is really hard to read, at least when you get to my age. Death of a Foreigner, Chapter 1, Lorna Dumont. As a child, Lorna once told her mother she remembered her father's sparkly blue eyes. Her mother snapped back that they were brown. Besides, she continued, you were only 3 when he left. You couldn't possibly remember. But Lorna did remember her father. One memory was stubbornly lodged in her brain, unfocused and slippery, but always there. She was lying on a green velvet sofa, its silky nap soft against her cheek. Beside her, a man was talking in a kind voice, as if trying to cheer her up. Her brother was the only other male in the house, and it certainly wasn't him. The whole memory filled her with such warmth, she knew it must have been her father. Lorna never said a word of this to her mother or brother. Ever since her father walked out of their lives without a backward glance in the summer of 1951, he'd become the great unmentionable in the family. Therefore, she continued to silently hug the memory to her, all the sweeter for knowing she would never tell anyone. Just one hand.
I just got lost in the past. It was a little bit too much. I want to know what's happening now. Why is this story important now? Then we can find out about her childhood later on once we care about her as a character.
I was okay with the past coming into the future. I can't say I was crazy about it, and I think partly because so far it looks like she has a very romantic idea about someone that walked out of her life, but that doesn't mean it's going to be carried out. I mean, maybe in the second page or something we'll find out, or maybe that will be just her viewpoint. It sounds like there's other viewpoints since it has her name in there. So maybe it's going to present her viewpoint in this very romantic way. So it seemed a little cloying and sentimental to me, but I was interested.
My assumption is that the blue-eyed dude isn't her father. It's gonna be a ghost or somebody or something. That's what I'm working with. But I really liked the opening because I think the daughter saying, you know, I remember my father, in this like romanticized way, and the mother being like, you don't even remember. That defined those characters' relationships, all three of them to each other in one sentence. It was pretty well done. And then the rest just elaborated on it, and I would have kept reading.
I'm a child of divorce, so that resonated with me. I was prepared to go further.
Does anyone want to fess up to that one? And yeah, I agree with that first line. Although the sparkly blue eyes, it was like, that was almost a red flag.
Yeah.
But then when her mother snapped back that they were brown, it's like, okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Take a cliche and destroy it. Now you got my attention.
Yeah, so. Sibling rivalry. I was 2 months old the first time Simon tried to kill me. I knew this only through anecdote, of course, as I have no memory of it. But years later, Mother confessed that at the time she saw it only as the normal resentment of a precocious 5-year-old faced with the invasive presence of a squalling baby sister. When I was 3, Simon pushed me into the clothes dryer with a load of wet towels, then set us all to tumble dry. The towels cushioned my ride, and our combined weight stopped the already malfunctioning appliance. I came out with an egg-sized bruise on my forehead and a fear of the dark. It was during my first week of kindergarten when the true depth of my brother's determination to get rid of me became clear. After performing her parental duty on the first day, Mother charged Simon with the responsibility of escorting me safely across the single street between home and school. He demonstrated remarkable restraint, waiting 3 days before pushing me into the path of an oncoming car. The driver's superb reflexes limited the damage to a skinned knee and a bruised hip. By the time I was 8, I had survived a plunge down the basement steps, a morning locked in the trunk of a family car, and a few days in hospital after drinking milk laced with Mother's antidepressants. I learned to keep distance and, whenever possible, other people between my brother and me. And I slept with a chair wedged under my bedroom doorknob after waking one night to find Simon standing over me with a baseball bat. That it was only a plastic bat was no less alarming. I was 10 when I decided I would have to get rid of Simon.
Where should we start?
Well, it caught my attention because my little brother's name is Simon. I just, like I said, it doesn't really do YA, but if this came across my email, I probably would have just kept reading because the voice is so interesting and I want to know why they hate each other so much. So.
I think that's great. I really like it. I love the first line. When Simon tried to kill her, and I was caught then. Part of it's the tone. It's got a nice lightness. Like it's talking about all these heavy things with this nice lightness, and you can't introduce really heavy things in a really heavy tone. We won't want to keep reading. It's just too much. But that tone was really perfect, I thought, for that. I also thought it was great because I'm wondering what's happening with Mom. Surely Mom's catching on, and then we get it with the milk. Mom's on antidepressants. Mom's not really aware of what's going on. And then, of course, the twist when I decide to kill Simon. So I thought it was very good. Very well done.
I'm not sure being on antidepressants means mom doesn't know what's going on, but she's got potentially other things going on as well. I loved it. The tone was fantastic. The pacing was good. The hook at the beginning echoed the hook at the end. And I just read some nonfiction about this sort of thing, like child murderers, basically, and that echoed what I'd read in the nonfiction. So I feel like it's actually obviously exaggerated realism, but it wasn't far enough away that I had trouble like suspending my disbelief. So I really liked it.
I'd like to talk to the author after the panel.
Yeah, me too, actually. Yeah, and you know what? When you can hear everybody in the room laughing, you know you got a winner.
This is a good focus group. You know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So well done. Crownless. All her young life, the Princess Snow White had been warned to stay away from the dark forest. Creatures from a long-forgotten age still roamed these woods, or so they said, and she hesitated as they approached it now. "Hunter, I think we should turn back," she protested, not for the first time. "I'm not really in a mood for exploring today." "What, is the princess scared?" the young huntsman taunted her in return, a smirk on his swarthy face. "Don't worry, I'll protect you. I've traveled these woods many times before." His jibe had the desired effect, and Snow White could feel her spine stiffening with indignation. "Of course I'm not scared. It's just getting late. We need to make it back to the castle in time for tea, or my father will be upset." "We wouldn't want to upset the king at tea time, now would we?" he laughed. Snow White pursed her lips. "You should worry of it more than I. It's your head he'll take if we're late." "Old King Evander's a good sort. He wouldn't." Hunter shook his head, laughing at her. "No, it's that wife of his I'd worry about more. Your mother's a terrifying sort, Princess." "Queen Portia is not my mother." Snow White wrinkled her nose as though she'd just caught wind of something unpleasant. All right. Who wants to start?
I love fairy tales and I like fairy tale retellings, but I need to know right at the very start that this is going to offer me something different from what I've read already before, and I don't get this with that. And it's also a lot of conversation that is just trying to tell me the things that they could be showing me instead.
And I found the conversation isn't really it's going right along with the fairy tale story as we know it, and I agree with Rhonda that unless it's doing something different, I'm not that interested. I know the story is Snow White, and you have to show us soon that it's going to do something different, but it seems to be going right along with the Snow White story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly what they said. It just felt like the same Snow White story, the same cliches. If there's going to be something that makes it different, then we need to have that right away.
Same.
And that was about halfway down the page. Get to the bottom of the page, and it's still the same Snow White story. So, I would agree with that. If it's a new take on a fairy tale, it has to feel new. I mean, and it may be some great twist that happens later, but we need a hint of that in the first page.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The pair of sneakers, tied together at the laces, hangs from the telephone wire, swaying back and forth in the afternoon breeze. I've been staring at them for at least 10 minutes. They're my new blue Reebok high tops, my only pair of shoes beside the prissy patent leather ones I'm wearing. Mum can't afford to buy me another pair. No way to get them down either. Now the sky is clouding up. Just my luck, it will pour rain and they'll get soaked. Crawford snatched them from me and had no trouble holding me off with one arm. He's a foot taller than me and already sprouting a beard. "Go get them, squirrel," he said, and flung them high in the air where they caught. "Let's see if you can climb the pole." Maybe I could call the fire department. They have long ladders. I doubt if they'd come, though. No one pays attention to what happens in Mercury. A person could be sprawling on the ground bleeding and on fire, and they wouldn't come. "Figure out how to get them down yet?" he asks. He's leaning against the wall with a stupid smirk on his face. I turn and scowl at him. "You're just mad because I showed you up in gym class. You fell on your ass and I climbed to the top." He laughs. "Be nice, squirrel. What are they worth to you?" He looks me up and down, making my skin crawl. "Don't even think about it," I say. "Pfft, I already have a girlfriend. I need someone small and agile to do a job for me. I shake my head. Everyone else in the neighborhood struggles while Crawford and his friends have pockets full of money. No way I want to get involved with him and his schemes. I'm not a punk like you. Give me back my shoes and leave me alone. And my name is Melody. Squirrel, do this for me and I'll buy you 2 new pairs of sneakers. Do you want to start?
Oh, I mean, I really do like the sneakers on the wire because you see them so often and you always know there's a story there. So I did like the use of that, and I put my hand up before I found out it was a girl, which makes me a little bit more interested, but I did feel, it's telling me so much. I just feel like I know where this story is going right at the beginning. Like it's not really drawing me in. I felt more like I was getting a bit of a summary. Now, I could be surprised, but that was the way the beginning felt to me.
I was about to put up my hand, and then there was that line about being bleeding and on fire, which recaptured my attention. A little bit of humor was nice. And calling her Squirrel made me think of Squirrel Girl, so I wondered if maybe this was going in sort of a superhero direction. But it would be nice to find out a little bit faster kind of what the crux of the story, like what the genre is going to be, because it was hard to tell if it was just urban fantasy YA or some kind of science fiction YA, so some clues for that would have been nice.
I liked it. I like that it started with a familiar image that you see that has different meanings to different people, so we could like wait and find out what the meaning was. I like that it started with a small problem that was then leading to a bigger problem. I loved Squirrel as a nickname because that told us a lot about the main character. I didn't love that I didn't know that it was a female main character until the end, because that just felt important to me with the way she was interacting with the bully. And it would have helped me understand better when the bully was looking her up and down, and that automatically indicated sexual interest of some sort. I didn't get the connection. I need some more details there. And obviously I know that there's like gay couples and dudes can look at dudes with sexual interest, but I assume, unless I am told straight up, probably because I'm straight, that it is like usually straight. So I actually liked that I thought it was 2 guys because it was different from what I usually see in YA, but I needed to know why that just one sentence indicated some sort of sexual interest, and then, well, I already have a girlfriend, and then, oh, wait, it's a girl, oh, okay. But I liked it, and I would have kept reading.
Everything they said, I guess, but I was kind of surprised because I knew it was a girl, and I'm now trying to figure out how I do that.
It's because she's wearing patent leather shoes.
Oh,
in
that's
the
true.
first-
That's
yeah.
true.
I knew there was
Because I don't know
something.
what
That's true, and then I went right back to boy after
Yeah.
that, but you're right.
Yeah, you're right, I missed that.
Yeah. Maybe even make it more obvious. Maybe call them Mary Janes or something. You know, it's because boys can have
Yeah,
patent leather shoes, but they're
yeah.
not usually prissy. Yeah.
But they
Yeah.
called him
Prissy. So yeah.
That's
like,
on me.
If you make
That's
it
right.
Mary Jane's, it'll be like clear. And I would say there's a couple of structural things I would do with this. Like, I would move the introduction of Crawford. I'd move that paragraph down 1 paragraph. Have her thinking about the fire department, and then you'll get that bleeding on fire line a little bit earlier. And then it doesn't interrupt. Like, you've got Crawford, then you can go right into the interaction with Crawford. So I would restructure that a little bit. But it's interesting. There's an interesting proposition there. What does he want her to do? And obviously it's illegal. And yeah. So anyone want to own this one?
It's a secret.
It's a secret. Well, yeah. Whoever it is, keep going with it. This one starts with a quote. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. John 15:7. A glint of red, contrasting against the pristine white of the fallen snow, gave him pause, the prayer on his lips falling away as he bent down, running the thick pad of his thumb across the crimson ice crystals. The shimmering sky of early dawn lighting the snow with a purity set in contrast to the trail of red. Disfigured shadows from the naked tree branches crept across the landscape as his eyes scanned the forest floor, following a path that called him deeper into the brush. Each speck, growing in size as he walked, looked like a bright red rose petal drawn by an artist onto the surface of the hardened snow. His wandering brought him to a clearing where the roses bloomed, pure and bright. Red velvet seemed to rise from the ground, stretching outward toward the stark, bare birch trees that bent and creaked in the wind, as if they too were trying to reach out and touch the petals. Was your hand up?
Oh, no, sorry.
Sorry, I'll keep going. Just two, so okay. In the center of the split bouquet lay the most beautiful woman. Oh, it's plural. Women Henry had ever seen. He assumed she was beautiful, but in truth he couldn't tell just then. She was naked, laying face down in the snow. Streaks of scarlet fanned out from her body, as though she had angel wings made of her own flesh.
Okay.
All right, that was 3? Or-
Yeah, I'm actually, when you finished the sentence, I pulled my hand
Okay,
back
I'll
down.
keep-
It
I'll
went way
keep
better. That sentence went way better.
Hello, Henry called, but she did not answer him. She did not move. Henry looked up to the heavens and then back at his snowy angel. Mine. The thought came strong and true. This, she, was his. The Lord had sent her to Henry. His prayers had been heard. She would love him and he her. The relief of that realization brought him to his knees. Crawling to her, thankfulness to the heavens spilling from his mouth, he watched the slow rise and fall of her back with each breath she took. He reached to her, but quickly pulled back his hand. Curiosity had him longing to touch her, but reverence made him hesitate. Instead, he took a fresh cigarette from his pack. Flicking the lighter, his angel was illuminated in a warm orange glow. He let his eyes wonder, ignoring the sting of the lighter against his thumb. Long, wavy hair, the color of wheat, fell across her shoulder blades. Amongst its obvious beauty lay clumps of tangled wildness, matted in a maroon sludge. It twisted and knotted around her so that her face was completely hidden from him, but did not hide her body. That's all you know.
Yeah.
I would have been biased against this from the beginning because I don't generally like Christian fiction, and it starts with a quote from the Bible, so I would have been reading through that filter of, is this going to be that or is it going to be something else? And it starts, and I'm curious why the ice is crimson, and I'm interested, and then it keeps going, and then I don't know what I'm supposed to feel about this. He's just walking, there's no affect. Then we get to the blood angel, which is very Hannibal-esque. If you watch Hannibal, the television show, and then when he says mine, this is mine, it's still Hannibal-esque because he says this is my design. So I would want to change things to make sure they don't have those familiar notes. You don't want to call to a popular fiction thing like that for many reasons. But as we got to the end, it occurred to me that the reason I might not be feeling anything, or I might not know what I'm supposed to be feeling, is because perhaps the main character also doesn't have that, and if it's written specifically to have no affect, then that would make sense. But I might not have gotten that far to find that out.
I actually agree with a lot of what you said, because I thought if this guy's delusional, then I'm getting it. And if he's not, it starts off really quite romantic but then if that's in his head, fine. I'm also a bit confused about the biblical quotation at the beginning. But then there's parts of it, so then she's found sprawled naked, and it was so beautiful with the red, it was like, oh. But then it's of her own flesh, so then we get a little bit of the grisly in there, the realistic. I'm still wondering why he's not reacting, but he pulled out a cigarette. And so that is such a realistic kind of thing. It brought me back down to that. And then I really liked it when he went mine. And then I thought, he's delusional. But I was never, it's mixed, I wrote down mixed messages. I'm really not too sure. Like, it's intriguing me, but it's also sending me off in different directions.
Yeah, a lot of what they said. Something I noticed was that he's following a trail of blood, but there's no footprints, if I recall correctly. So I'm wondering how she's gotten to where she's gotten, and if she's laying there bleeding out, why is he smoking? Like, is he some kind of psychopath? Or Yeah, it was very confusing, and I kept listening mostly because I was hoping that some of that confusion would resolve itself. Yeah, so I was intrigued, but maybe not for the reasons that you would hope a reader would be intrigued.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found it quite muddled, like there's a lot of imagery to absorb for the reader and not much orienting action. So as you said, like they sort of went this way and then that way, and I couldn't ever grasp what was going on. And I just found it confusing is the overwhelming thing that I got from it. And it's really difficult if you're starting a book with a character who's confused or who doesn't, have that affect. It's really hard to, like, it's a hard thing to try to do. But yeah, I just found it alienating for all of the reasons that you said. I just couldn't get into it.
Yeah, I agree with all those reasons. And the writing at the beginning is beautiful, like it's very poetic, but there's a bit much of it at the beginning of a book. Space that out a little bit is what I would say. Okay. It was the end of September, and if you were to ask me at this moment, I would tell you my life was as complex as the colors of the fall season we were now in. I stared out of the window at the large oak tree that stood in the middle of the schoolyard, whose leaves were now turning vibrant shades of yellow, orange, and red. I allowed my hands to get caught up in the moment, sketching its replica in the book that sat on my desk. This was my favorite time of year, and drawing was one of my passions. It had been since the first day I set foot on this island. Sure, I'd liked painting and drawing when I lived back home in California, but there was something different about Pender Island. Its beauty and its surroundings were captivating. Although fall meant the beginning of another school year, which was not in the least bit appealing to me, it also meant the town would slow back down to a normal pace. Pender Island is a vacation town, so for 4 months of the year, the population of our little island of less than 3,000 more than doubles. The concerts, festivals, art shows all drawing in a crowd, but I don't mind it too much. Okay. Do you wanna start?
Basically, nothing's happening, and it's just exposition, and it's deadly.
I agree. I had a note about at the beginning there, like if I were to describe if you were to ask me to describe my life, I would describe it as whatever, the thing about the complex colors. If that is actually sincerely how the character would answer that question, then that is fantastic and it helps define the character. If not, it's hyperbolic and it will push the reader out. And I was starting to lose interest, but then it mentioned it was on Pender Island, which is a place where I'm familiar with, so I was like, okay, I'll stay.
Yeah.
And then it started to explain Pender Island to me, and I was like, yeah, no.
Yeah, I was waiting for something to happen, and I was, because of Pender Island also, which I vacationed on as a child, I was willing to hang on a bit longer, but nothing really was. And the part about, my life being like the autumn leaves or whatever, kind of got me a bit, but it wasn't attaching onto anything. So, yeah, I think it's a weak beginning.
Yeah, what they said. Pender, I was about to put up my hand and then Pender Island. Ooh, Canadian setting.
Yeah.
Someplace I've been. And then the info dumping, just that, it's never good, but especially not that early in the story.
And then the rest of the page is actually backstory too, so that's even more deadly. We want to know what's going to happen, not what has happened in the past. Okay. So we're almost out of time here. Mum in school is trouble. The staccato rhythm of her heels on the brown tile floor make my skin crawl. It was cold in the school. The heat was turned off for the weekend. We turned towards Ralph's classroom. That is very bad. Did Ralph's call us, or is Mum mad at him? Sister Campbell, do come in and be comfortable, Mr. Ralphs gushed at her as we reached his room. I'm sorry to have to call you, he spoke only to her, frowning at me. You were quite mysterious this morning, she said. Just what seems to be the trouble, Mr. Ralphs? She sat beside his desk. I pressed record on my Dobson. Ralph's hands clasped on top of the manila folder that sat alone on his always clear desk. Shall we begin with a word of prayer, Sister Campbell? Mr. Ralphs, we are in a public building, not a church conducting government business. So what is the problem? Mr. Ralph's lips pursed. He made scathing comments about separation of church and state. At church, not in the classroom where the state of Idaho paid his salary. God is everywhere, Sister Campbell, but as you wish. I have been teaching civil society since Mr. Mullen's death. Yes, Mum said. Both Hugh and his brother. Okay. Okay.
I just hate these people, and I'm not going to read more. Simple as that.
Yeah.
Not for my press, maybe another one, but
Yeah.
not me.
Staccato rhythm over heels is cliche. It's in every book that anybody ever wears heels and walks on a hard floor.
Yeah.
So you want to avoid that. I was waiting for something to happen and nothing happened, so I put my hand up, and then I liked the mother, so then I put my hand back down. But then nothing happened again, so then I put my hand back up.
I was interested in the mother coming into school. I was interested in why she was called sister, but I was waiting, and nothing was really unfolding.
Yeah, I was more interested in the mother being sassy than I was in the child who seems to be the main character. And then when I brought up the dead teacher, like, why do we care about the dead teacher? Does he really matter? So.
All right. Last one. Day 1. Let's go to our next caller. Good evening, Mike. How are things out there in Big Sky Country? Beautiful as always, George. But I must admit, what you guys have been talking about, the night's starting to feel a bit spooky. I guess the topic will do that to you, Mike, especially when you're out on the road alone. Hands-free, I hope? You bet. I've been trucking for 18 years. Never had an accident, thank the Lord. Never intend to. Anyways, I had an experience about 8 years back that I figured your guest might be interested in. Okay, Mike, let's hear about it. Well, I was driving a load of pork ribs from the big cargo plant up in Alberta out to Portage la Prairie, Quebec. It was about 5:30 Saskatchewan, and things have been boring for at least an hour when I saw what looked to be this big orange fireball setting on the horizon. Mike, what time was this? Around about midnight, I guess. Clear sky or cloudy? Pretty clear, as I recall. Okay, so good visibility. Sorry for interrupting. Please continue. No probs. So I'm looking at this thing thinking what a nice moonrise it was when I remember that I'd seen the moon up about half an hour before. Well, I would have liked to stop, but you just don't do that when you got a schedule to keep, so I just kept an eye on it. That's 3.
For me, it was for me, this isn't the place to start a story. I mean, there might be something further on, but this is somebody telling a story of what happened. And really the most interesting thing to me was that it was trucking, because it starts off so western, Big Sky Country and that. So when I heard it was a trucker, oh, maybe a trucker's kind of interesting, but then he's just telling a story. I'd like something more immediate, I guess.
And why is the DJ interrupting? Just without knowing what the topic of that they were discussing, maybe it's important to the topic, but we don't know that yet. So I'm just like, shut up, dude, and let him tell the story. And then he's like, sorry for interrupting. I'm like, you should be.
I just wanted to know why there was that frame of the call-in show, because that format wasn't working for me at all. I'd rather, if we're gonna have an incident that he's gonna tell about, I never wanna hear stuff secondhand. I want him to be on the highway, in the truck, and me seeing the damn fireball, and then we'll talk, right? But,
Unless the DJ is actually the main character that we're gonna get to, but we don't know that yet, of
but,
course.
yeah, I mean, I tried to give it time, but I just couldn't stay with it, right? So,
It felt like a prologue, which could have been okay. I was willing to keep going. I want to know, is it aliens? Is it zombies? Like, what's the setting? I was curious enough to find out
Quick
what
thing
happened
about
next.
prologues, because I know we're gonna get kicked out of here really soon, but when a story comes in to the Slush with a prologue in it, if a novel comes in with a prologue, I don't read the prologue. I go to chapter 1.
I take it and put it at the bottom of the stack, because books with prologues, 9 times out of 10, I'm gonna toss them. Because prologue means you have no idea where the story starts. In all the books I've edited, there's only once I told somebody, yeah, you need a prologue here. Everybody else, that prologue has gotta go, because it's backstory and I don't want it.
Yeah, I'm being a total hypocrite. I have a prologue in my novel I'm writing. But I fully expect the editor to go.
Don't send it, yeah, don't.
All right. I think we are out of time, so thank you, panel. And thank you everyone for being brave enough to put your stuff in. It takes guts to,
It totally does.
Yeah, so thank you.